Welcome to Replayable, where we go into depth on our favorite tabletop games that keep us coming back again and again. I'm the star player Todd, and today I'm joined by David and Paul. For our 42nd episode, we will be attempting to exploit corporate servers, or else aggressively stopping such attempts, in Android Netrunner. This game has a long history, being originally released as Netrunner in 1996 by Wizards of the Coast, and then by Fantasy Flight Games in their Android universe in 2012. It has since been re-released, but we'll talk about that in a bit. It was originally designed by Richard Garfield, but for the Android Netrunner release, Lucas Litzinger had a much more prominent role in adapting the original Netrunner game into the Android universe. Are you ready to break the ice?
I'm jacked in. Let's go.
As Tin Weasel said, why, yes, I do speak fluent Navajo.
All right, Android Netrunner is a two-player card game set in a cyberpunk world where one player takes on the role of a powerful corporation while the other plays as a hacker or runner. The corporation tries to advance secret agendas while the runner attempts to steal them by hacking into servers. Each side has unique abilities and tools, creating a game of asymmetrical gameplay. Players build custom decks of cards to suit their preferred tactics, with the corporation focusing on defense and economy, and the runner using stealth and speed. Why does this game have such an avid following? What about it sets it totally apart?
Oh, easy. It's amazing.
Yeah, I agree with that, but why?
I have been playing this game since 1996, and when it first came out, the original was amazing because it is asymmetric. You have two players playing very different games, competing against one another, and the way they interact is completely interwoven and unchangeable.
Right? Yeah, the asymmetry, games today, asymmetry is super popular, but in the flavor of, leaders or factions where I have a few more player powers than you do. When we say asymmetry now, it's not like Netrunner where the two people are playing totally different games almost.
Right.
And the only thing close to that I could think of would be like Root maybe does that. It's been a while since I played Root, but right. You have a wildly different path to get to your victory condition.
No, I think that's a good example.
I almost think that asymmetry doesn't capture what Netrunner's doing because of how we use it today in modern games.
Mm-hmm.
We've diluted the term.
Yes.
Well, in many ways, we've tried to add minor differences as opposed to radically different game styles that are somehow competing against each other directly. So I like that.
Yeah. Well, in fact, the mechanic listed is, or the mechanism is variable player powers. And I feel like that doesn't even come close to capturing what's going on in here. This isn't variable player powers. This is two different games happening at the same time.
Well, you should work on creating a new family on Board Game Geek for asymmetric play.
Well, it's going to have, 1.5 games in it?
There's a lot.
Yeah. There are at least 3.
Okay.
And you've already covered the second one, which would be Root.
I hope I didn't step on anybody's comps.
Not yet.
Okay.
What about the theme here? So cyberpunk for me is like alchemy. It's one of my favorites. Like I really gravitate towards that theme, but it doesn't seem to be well implemented very many times. This would be one of those exceptions. I mean, I think this one is just fantastic. How do you feel about the theme in Android Netrunner?
It's amazing. It's superlative. I think that what Lucas and the Fantasy Flight team did by including factions to the game based on the original Android board game that they had earlier made just elevated Netrunner so much higher than it already was. There's 4 corps: Genteki, who's focused on clones, Hospiroroid, who's focused on androids, and they're constantly fighting each other, Wayland, who has the space elevator, and then NBN, who's basically the big brother of the universe. And then the three factions of runners, the Shapers, who are just interested in perfecting the art of running, the Anarchs, who just want to burn down the system
right.
and help the little guys, and then Criminals, who are solely out for personal profit. And when you build a deck in this Android Netrunner game, you get a set of cards for free based on which faction you choose. And then based on the character that you're personally going to play, you can also borrow in other cards from different factions. And each card has a cross-faction cost. this just elevated the theme so much, almost without trying. Like once they laid this groundwork, it slowly formed a new story and it propelled them to really flesh out the whole Android universe.
Right?
Yeah, to hear you put it that way, Paul, by listing everything out, I remember our innocent days when that was all science fiction, and now it's just our reality. I feel like we could map actual corporations onto the corps and actual, people onto the runners.
Yes. I'm still waiting for that space elevator, though.
It's really interesting if you want to get into the inspirations for it, because Richard Garfield, back when he made Netrunner, he said this is based on Cyberpunk 2020, which was in turn based on Blade Runner. And Blade Runner is really all about governments don't matter anymore. The whole world is a corporatocracy, and that's the world of Netrunner as well.
I mean, we don't go very RSP here, but...
I'm just waiting for one of you to step across the line, so let's not do that.
We know what gets edited out, so let's just flirt with it. In your prompt here on theme, you asked, is it cyberpunk enough? Which I thought was hilarious because, what else do you want? It has it all. When I think of cyberpunk, the Orwellian dystopia, the, high-tech, low-life, hard-boiled, noir. When last time I read William Gibson's Neuromancer, it said, just go play Netrunner.
That was on page 1, huh?
Yeah.
That's funny you mentioned that, Dave, because what I found is that Neuromancer was kind of a fork in the cyberpunk development. One path was Blade Runner, which was the corporatocracy, but then the other path was Neuromancer, which was actually government's military work along with a more developed net or matrix, like the Matrix movie, that Blade Runner didn't really flesh out as much.
Right.
Okay.
And when I think of cyberpunk, this is going back to the RPG days of the 1980s where cyberpunk RPG was a thing, right? And then we went on to GURPS Cyberpunk that was released by Steve Jackson Games. And then there's Shadowrun. And each of those have the idea of street samurai, where you're giving up humanity to get augmentations that make you better at either combat or running, being a decker and running against corporate computer resources, or being a rigger and driving machines. I don't feel like there's any of that in Android Netrunner, where I am giving up part of my humanity to become more of a cyborg and flirting with that. And what augmentations can I afford versus going to the discount cutter down the street to get it done?
Yeah, there certainly are augmentations in Netrunner, but because the game is about running the net, they're all focused on improving your memory or how you interact with things in NetSpace.
Right. So I guess it's that part of it. If you just focus on the decker or the running part against corporate resources and you just keep it to that, I can't expect any more. But in my mind, cyberpunk as a genre has more to it than just that.
Well, I would argue that on the corp side, you do have more to it. You have your wetworks groups, you have your brainwashing groups, you have the agenda that pay homage to a lot of the things you talked about.
Right. That's true too. And you have the ambushes and the traps. And if I can get you down to discarding your last card, if you don't have one to discard when you need to, then
yes,
you're essentially neutralized, but you can tell that story however you like. Maybe
it depends if that happens in Meat Space or in NetSpace.
Right.
Well, when I'm playing the game, I get that feel that as the runner, my brain is connected to my rig somehow. So when I'm taking viruses, I'm taking damage. That's thematically, that's how I play it out, whether that's specifically there on the cards or not. But when the corporation sets a trap, a snare or something, sets a power surge through the net, and it kind of hits me and makes me lose some of my actual memory, cards in hand. I think it plays out that way.
Yeah, and then there's also the tags. That's them finding you in real life and maybe shooting you.
All right, I'm coming over to it. I like it. Yeah. I've mentioned quite a few of the ones that I enjoyed. What are some other of the cyberpunk universes that you guys have appreciated? So you mentioned William Gibson and Neuromancer, Dave. Are there any others?
Yeah, my exposure is mostly through novels. Like I didn't play the RPG or GURPS or Shadowrun. I haven't played any of these, but Neil Stephenson, Snow Crash, William Gibson, even Philip K. Dick. I know it's not all cyberpunk, but do androids
dream of
electric sheep?
Hardwired?
I have not.
Okay.
Who is that?
Searching.
Oh, okay. Next up on my Neil Stephenson read is a novel called Anathem, I believe.
Oh,
But
yeah.
it's so daunting and in like a doorstop of a book. I just haven't gotten to it yet, but it's
Hardwired was written by Walter John Williams in 1986 and was one of the key influences for the cyberpunk RPG.
okay. I'll put it on the list.
So, Paul, you mentioned Hardwired. Any others that stand out to you?
Well, for me, I really lean heavily on the movie, the original Blade Runner,
Right?
as what I think of and reference when it comes to cyberpunk.
Right. Hard not to, especially given how long that original movie has been around now and able to permeate our perceptions
I think the first time I saw it, it was just such a brain worm. It snuck in and I could never get it out.
I think one of the other innovations that Netrunner brought to the table, or specifically Android Netrunner, was not just the universe of Android and the factions, but it broke the paradigm of a CCG by introducing a game where it was possible for you to acquire all of the cards when the base game was released in a single buy, and then later if you kept up with the expansions. So how did that affect your enjoyment of this game, knowing that you could potentially have all the cards as opposed to continually doing booster pack buys and opening them and trying to find that one magic card, or else buying it at an extraordinary price in a pay-to-win scenario?
Yeah, Fantasy Flight cut their teeth on that model with Game of Thrones, the card game.
Yeah, so Android Netrunner, it was my first LCG, but preceding that, FFG had Call of Cthulhu, Game of Thrones, Warhammer Invasion, and Lord of the Rings.
Jeez. Okay.
Yeah, but
and arguably all of those were influenced by Blue Moon.
Oh, interesting. I hadn't really thought about that. You're talking about the Kinesia?
Yeah.
Hold on, you just blew my mind. You guys continue. I didn't even think about that. It's right there.
I got to check the dates on these. Geez, Blue Moon was 2004. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, because it was basically buying a faction or a set. It was a pre-built deck that you could then play against others. And you could do some mild construction with it as well.
Yeah, it does have some deck construction.
You can do more than mild construction, because as they kept releasing additional packs in Blue Moon, they would slip in one or two cards of other factions.
Oh, I guess I didn't stick around long enough to be aware of that.
Right.
But anyway, I personally really like that format because that is what I ended up doing in the CCG format long ago. I just realized I don't want to open booster packs. If I win booster packs in a tournament or get them some other way, I'm just going to sell them and end up taking that money for a complete set.
Okay. So did you ever go the route of just buying the one card that you were looking for?
Well, I was very young back then, so I would trade for it.
There you go.
But yes, I was very focused on just only having, 3 or 4 copies of each card and getting rid of all the others.
Nice.
The LCG, I think, is an interesting innovation in the space that people were really souring on CCGs, at least people that I was close to, is that it's a pay-to-play system.
Right.
The more money you put, the better you can do. And my early days of playing Magic, I was fortunate enough to where 2 of my local game stores closed. So it's like good news, bad news. You're losing your game store. Good news, they're liquidating everything.
Right.
So I got a ton of Magic cards for cheap. But even then, I was current for, 6 months to a year, and then here comes more, and like, oh my gosh, especially when you're young, like I just couldn't keep up.
I mean, I found that to eventually be true for the LCG format as well. I could not keep up with 6 sets a year. I was like, what are you guys doing? I'm out.
That's why I was saying I think it's an interesting space.
Right. And I was going to actually bring that up. I'm glad you said that, Paul, because LCG on the surface is you don't have to pay to play, but at 6 releases per year with a deluxe expansion on top of it, I mean, it is pay to play still. It's just you're getting everything if you keep up, as opposed to, well, there was that one rare card I never saw.
Right.
Yeah, I couldn't do it. So I unfortunately could only afford to stick around with Netrunner for a few cycles.
Well, I think the consumer's fatigued on the LCG system as well. There are, of course, a few still out there, but FFG over the years has had 11 LCGs. Currently, they have 2. There's only 2 still in production, and those are both very strong.
And they slowed down on those releases as well, right?
Okay, so Arkham Horror and...
Arkham Horror and Marvel Champions. Yeah, and the new release style that came with the revised Arkham Horror, that, I think, calming down that fire hose of content really is the most like consumer forward friendly thing I think I've ever seen. Is that now, and I think the pandemic is what corrected it, is keeping track of all of those SKUs. And during the pandemic, where people were getting into Arkham Horror and trying to pick up packs here and there, and it was just getting impossible to complete a full cycle, when FFG just put an entire cycle in one box.
Right.
I guess that wasn't going on in Netrunner. Netrunner was still like a monthly release thing. Yeah. And
it totally was.
Yeah. But now
at the very end, they made a second edition, and then they had a first set come out. But I think the IP the copyright got canceled while that was in production. And so it was a limited print run at the very end.
Right. So the revised edition, I mean, I don't know the exact dates on it.
2017.
Right, 2017. And then they still had one cycle to come out. And then they had Reign and Reverie as the last deluxe expansion that kind of threw in all the cards they were thinking about for future sets. They just put them all into one and threw it out there. And it had a very limited run. And trying to find copies of that one now are really difficult to find for mortal prices. So that's LCGs. Talking about the game. So you mentioned it's two separate games. Let's start off with this one because this is close to my heart after the last time we played, Dave. Does the corporation feel menacing enough in this game? And if so, how do you get there? Because we had like 3 games in a row and the runner won all 3.
Well, I think that's the nature of System Gateway, which is what we were playing.
Mm-hmm.
I think System Gateway heavily favors the runner. I don't think I've ever seen the corp win in System Gateway because the corp has one thing to do: advance agendas. That's it. You're not damaging. I mean, once you add some cards, you start to do some tags and viruses.
So this is a special like starter deck with a special corp that is not one of the factions. Is that correct?
Well, it's pretty generic
at first. It is, but then it is an HB Corp as you start adding cards. But even then, it's still super generic. It just
so Haas Bioroid has a lot of ways to double advance or triple advance agendas and surprise the runner.
Yeah,
was that in the decks you played?
There is advance a card twice that you installed. Not on this turn. I do remember seeing that card, but not a ton like sneak attacks. Like boom, I'm scoring this agenda right now.
And we get into an area that maybe we talk about, but like when you're crafting these decks, the ratio of agendas to ice to economy starts becoming a thing, because we had one of those games where I was drawing a lot of my corporate agendas early into my hand. So HQ was rife with targets, but I didn't have a lot of ice to protect it. So Dave was just able to run early, run often, and he was just scoring points off of me. And I literally couldn't defend it to the point where I finally got ice out in front of me to protect me. He didn't have icebreakers, but he could just tank the damage and get through and win. I mean, it was a glorious run to watch, but I felt powerless to stop it.
That's why as a corp you have to bluff a lot. And sometimes if you're super flooded, just discard an agenda face down to your archive. I've had games where the runner never even checked.
Really?
Yeah. Runners often only run the archive to play an event card that allows them to access something in another server.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, like if you have a successful run on a central server, you get this. And you've got your R&D and HQ all iced up. Like, I'll just run archive so I can trigger that card.
You didn't, though.
You didn't actually run archive, so you don't get to look at the archive. And that's why secretly discarded agendas can sometimes stay hidden there. Because the corp is menacing on a certain schedule. In the middle of the game, the corp's going to have way more money and resources than the runner, and they're going to be able to score agendas before the runner's able to break into them. But by the end of the game, when the runner has set up their rig and everything, and they've gone to their day jobs enough to have oodles of money, there's no way for the corp to stop them at all.
Well, and that's the nature of Haas Bioroid, is that the ice is so powerful, but the runner can often interact with it with time instead of money. Basically, you're negotiating with the bioroids. You're spending clicks instead of money or instead of ice-breaking programs, that all of this impressive ice, if the runner is patient, can still get through, which is, something you have to deal with, I think, which takes just experience with the core.
And having bluffs is super important there too, because there's a lot of upgrades or other kinds of remote assets you can install that allow you to advance them. And they look like agendas, and then the runner accesses them and you're like, fooled you. You just wasted all your clicks and money.
Right.
Well, that's an element of the game that I'm just terrible at. And that's something that I need to get stronger at.
Oh, yeah, so am I.
I feel like when I set a trap, the runner 100% knows that it's a trap. And like now I spent all this time, like I advanced it and I've got this great server and that runner's never going to run that server. And now it's 3 turns later. It's definitely not an agenda. I'm like, all right, I'll just cut my darlings and uninstall it. Fine.
You just reminded me, I was watching the World Championships from last year, and it was one of the top 8 games. And the Corp put down an asset and then an upgrade in the remote server very early, protected by a single ice. The runner was like, I'm not ready. They left it. It stayed there, face down, the entire game until the last turn when he advanced it 4 times to win.
Yeah. That's great because it looks like it's a trap.
It looked like it was a trap that the runner called him on, and he's like, you got me. But then on the very last turn, he's like, oh, I advanced it 4 times. I win.
I saw something similar on one of those kinds of games I was watching on YouTube where the Corp installed 2 cards on remote servers with no ice. And then the runner
just left him out there naked.
Left him out there. He didn't know what to do with them. And then next turn, I mean, this is second turn or, third turn, then the corporation just scores one of them, just like that. So I think with your situation, Todd, where you're just drawing agendas and that's all you're drawing, part of that is I knew you were only drawing agendas because I could read your frustration with what was going on. So I think that was just our inexperience.
You have to play the Corp. Yeah.
Yeah. But it was clear to me that your hand was full of agendas and maybe it shouldn't have been. And at the same time, when we reversed it, when I was playing Corp, I think it was clear to you that I was not drawing agendas. So you just ran roughshod over my R&D because clearly that's full of agendas because they're not in my hand.
That was true.
Yeah. So I think that's just I'm just not that good at this game that I absolutely love.
Right. Okay. You mentioned Hasbiroid being focused on moving their agendas forward and aggressively. Which of the corps is like, okay, never mind agendas. I'm going to carry a minimum number of agendas. I just want to kill the hacker.
Oh, that's Jinteki.
Jinteki, yeah.
All right, I want to play them.
Yeah, they're full of traps and snares and
it's Y-foam.
All sorts of ways to. Their primary focus is killing the runner inside the net.
Okay.
Yeah.
Whereas I think Wayland, who's kind of based on the USA, has a lot of ways of finding the runner with tags and then killing them in meat space.
Yeah, Wayland, it's the corp with all the money. The runner's going to get through, but then Wayland's going to punish the runner for getting through. Like, you made it through, but now you've got tags.
Now we found out where you live.
Yes, that's right. We're sending people to your house.
But Wayland is like the actual company name in Blade Runner.
Oh, is it? I didn't remember that.
Yeah.
All right.
I mean, that's literally the company that's building the replicants that they're trying to stop.
Yeah. And then NBN, I think Paul went through these pretty thoroughly earlier, but NBN is at fast advancing agendas because they can disseminate information, right? So they can move their agendas quickly. Am I remembering that right, Paul?
They can also move things between servers and just do all sorts of funny business.
Misinformation.
Yeah. Well, I'll talk about it later, but one of their cards allows you to put cards back into your deck.
Oh, okay.
From where? From installed?
Sometimes, but the most popular one is from the archive.
Oh, so like a necro, black magic in magic, or some sort of necro, bringing in the dead card.
Bringing it in from the graveyard.
Yeah.
Interesting. All right. How about the way that the games progress? So, Dave, you said it earlier that each player's playing their own game, even to the way that the cards get laid out and played. I mean, I feel like there is magic in the way that this. Well, that's overused because of the game. Yeah.
The Gathering.
Yeah, no, stop.
Both Garfield games.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So many things to talk about.
Yeah.
The way that even the game plays out is investing and you feel connected with it, right? Like when I'm laying out my deck as the hacker or as the runner, I feel like, okay, I am building up my resources to be able to attack more efficiently. Whereas as the corp, I'm creating these remote servers and they feel like they're remote locations. It's really amazing to me how much I get invested in the theme just by laying out cards without having an actual board. Do you guys feel the same way?
Yeah. I mean, the corp has a very structured play area where everything has to be precisely so. The runner can just haphazardly put things everywhere.
Right.
Are you saying doing that to just kind of keep your tableau messy?
No, I guess I'm saying that there's no rule prescribed way for the runner to lay their cards out, whereas the corp has a very rigid way of laying cards down on the tableau.
I think I stick to the runner rig, but yeah, it doesn't have to be that way. But I got resources in the back row, my hardware in the middle, and then programs up front. But there's no reason to have it that way. But in the remote servers, I actually, when starting the game, I found that a little confusing. Like, so where's my remote server? It's like wherever you want it to be. Just, over here.
Right.
I mean, it has to go linear.
On the moon,
Yeah, exactly. And like, I don't have a remote server. It's like, just all you have to do is make one. How do you make one? Put a card down. That's it. Now you've got a remote server, which is great. But I think the language around all of it is what makes it so strong and so satisfying. You've got your central, look, you've got a hand of cards, you've got a draw pile, and you've got a discard pile. So we could talk about it that way. Or you've got your central servers with your headquarters, R&D, and archives. And it maps so strongly because, of course, your discard pile is called archives. It makes perfect sense. Of course, your draw pile is R&D. That's, where the new technology is coming from. Same with on the rig on the other side and the heat where everything goes.
My favorite on the other side for the runner are your assets, like your contacts. This guy in a pawn shop.
Yes.
Or a day job. Oh, I got to make a living. This running is my nighttime gig.
What's the money card for the runner?
Well, there's one that's just day job. Like you spend a couple clicks to get a bunch of money because you're going to work to 9 to 5.
Mm-hmm.
So do you have any particular cards you want to point out as being favorites?
Well, most of my favorite cards are corp cards. I'm not sure why. I think they're more fun and thematic. Although, like I said, when I played the original Netrunner, I really liked the card Tin Weasel, which was a runner code breaker who spoke Navajo. Yeah.
One of my favorite cards. The snare is good when you're able to pull it off. That's the Jinteki trap. That's always satisfying. But I think probably my favorite card is Inside Job, which is you get to bypass the first piece of ice. So you think, me spending clicks to get through your HB ice. This is just, I'm going to make a run and I'm going to ignore that first piece of ice. And that's just, it's so satisfying. Just like, that 6 strength ice means nothing to me. So,
yeah, I'll give a shout out to pinhole threading, which is an event that says you can run any server, but when you breach the server, instead of accessing that server, you access one card in any other server.
Whoa.
And the only stipulation is that if you access an agenda, you're not allowed to steal it through the pinhole, but you know where it is.
Yeah.
Oh.
That's some good recon.
I would say, since we're talking about it, my favorite corp card used to be Jackson Howard, who was the CEO of NBN.
Okay.
And he's an asset you install in a server, and you can either use him, spend a click to draw 2 cards, or you can just instantly remove him from the game to shuffle up to 3 cards from your archives into your deck. And then System Gateway reprinted it, and they called it Spin Doctor. And instead of letting you draw cards all the time, you only get to draw cards the moment that you res it, but it still lets you shuffle up to 2 cards from your archive into your deck.
Interesting. So let's talk about System Gateway. That's how you can play the game today. If you haven't gotten on board, obviously the Android Netrunner version by Fantasy Flight Games has been out of print for several years, but System Gateway is a fan, I guess, created entity. Do we want to talk about Null Signal Games and what their model is?
We definitely should.
Let's do it.
Well, one of the things I always think about when I play Netrunner is when Fantasy Flight Games stopped producing it, when they lost the license and Netrunner died a second time. Paul said, "Netrunner broke my heart twice." And I always think about that, like 2 times in his life. This is my favorite game. Goodbye. And then, it's back. Goodbye.
That's right. Yeah, so my heart goes out to the folks of Null Signal Games because they have resurrected my favorite game.
Well, and done it so well, too. So I just typically don't like stuff like this. Fan fiction, print and play games. I just give me the official game. That's all. I don't want, fan-made scenarios and all this. But here, it's absolutely great. They've done such a good job on, a lot of the cards are the cards that we saw in Android Netrunner. But, there's new cards, there's new artwork, and it's giving me the full experience I had when I was playing the old Android Netrunner. It's just so well done. And it used to be, you would buy it and then you'd You could print the cards yourself, you get the PDF files, or you can get it through drive-through cards or whoever they are. But now you can just buy the box directly from Null Signal Games. And it's great. It's a good value as well, too. It's, I think it feels expensive, $45 for a little box of cards, but I think the price is right along lines that you're paying for Arkham Horror or, Ashes Reborn or any of those kinds of games. It's great. You can still play it. I mourned the loss of Netrunner for so long until I finally said, all right, I'll try it. And I'm happy with it.
Yeah, because the thing about these kinds of games, these card games, these collectible card games or living card games, is they thirst for repeated plays. They thirst for playing partners and a community of players. And yeah, both times that Netrunner got canceled, the community of players dried up and it became very difficult to find somebody to play with.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think what's interesting about System Gateway is that it is compatible with Android Netrunner. So if you have the Android Netrunner cards and you want to continue playing, now they're going to have different backs. You could, you'll have to come up with opaque sleeves, but you could intermix them if you really wanted to, or I could come in with my Netrunner cards and play against Dave's System Gateway cards and it'd be perfectly fine.
Absolutely. It has all the same factions. They just reprinted several of the cards with new artwork. Fits right in.
The thing about System Gateway, though, it's a great intro to the game, but at the same time, it's a terrible intro to the game. It's the way they mete out the rules. So you start the game, and they do such a great job on it.
I think your use of System Gateway can be confusing because there's System Upgrade as well, which I would think you'd want to buy together. I guess what I'm trying to say is there is a minimum number of cards you want to own to make the game good. Is that what you're saying, Dave?
Well, yeah. So if you know how to play Netrunner, you can just jump in and buy cards and play. But I'm talking about if you've never played Netrunner and you want to see how the game goes, you're going to start with System Gateway. System Upgrade is good because you're going to move right into it pretty quickly. But those first few games of System Gateway, they strip the game down to just the basics of it. And it's a really, really bland experience. And if you have to get past that bland experience or you get those rules down to where you start getting the factions and the really interesting ways that, there's a lot of ways to win this game. And those aren't in the first few plays of System Gateway. So I think you just have to know that I'm learning the game 10, 20 plays in. Now you're really going to be, sailing with the game.
And ready to start doing deck building.
Yes.
That's the other piece of it, is that these are not pre-built decks per se, that you just say, I'm going to play Jinteki, now I'm going to play the Jinteki deck.
There is, the System Gateway has some pre-built decks, but those are the super bland decks. Yeah, pretty quickly you're going to have to get into deck building. And just like we talked about with other LCGs we've talked about, there's websites where people post their decks. You can rip those and use those. I think it's a little bit of a detriment because I think building your own decks is really how you get under the hood of the game. But I know that that's a hurdle for a lot of players, that it's a hassle. It's the game outside of the game. It's like when I used to ride motorcycles. I spent more time working on my motorcycle than I did riding my motorcycle out in the desert. And I think it feels that way, where you're constantly building your decks and tweaking your decks.
That is one thing that was a bit of a step down, I guess, from the original Netrunner, because Netrunner, the collectible card game, you could just open up, say, 60 cards, select the best 40, and play a game. It wasn't a well-tuned or crafted deck, but it was still fun because you would draw surprises and do all sorts of various things. With the LCG format and the factions, it's a lot harder to do that. There's some special characters that you can use to build these limited format decks now that allow you to not necessarily be a particular faction, but use all sorts of high-cost faction cards based on what you've opened. If you want to do a limited format, because I know like in Magic the Gathering, people love doing things like Cube Draft. Basically, you find whatever cards you have and make the best game you can out of that.
That's a great point, Paul. I think we talk about how great the LCG model has been, but that is really something that's been lost. Of that idea where you show up, everybody opens a couple boosters, you cobble together the best thing you can with, bamboo and snot and just let's go. This is as good as I can make this. And that's, fun. Your deck's going to have deficits. But with LCG, everybody's coming at the top level, that you have access to all the cards. You can build the best Jinteki deck that can be built at this time. And that's it's fun, but also something's kind of lost. It's fun to be scrappy. And
Right.
really, you only get that through CCGs.
All right.
I think the one thing we didn't really delve into, but it's on the notes, is that often the runner does want to face check ice that the corp has put down. Just run headfirst into it, whatever circumstances, results, or catastrophes that happen, be damned. And that's because if you do it on your first click, you can usually mitigate what happens. And most importantly, you're forcing the corp to spend a bunch of money, and that puts them behind.
Oh my gosh. That was our second game that Dave and I played the other night. Like his game as the corp was glittering prizes. He had more money than he knew what to do with. It was getting disgusting. He had like 20 plus credits that he could just res whatever he wanted, play whatever he wanted. And then on my run, I didn't get as many economy cards. And so I was poor, and he was doing exactly what you were saying. He was running early. I was resing stuff. So I was constantly poor as the corp. And that was a very good strategy for him.
It's situational, but yeah, sometimes you got to do what you got to do.
Right. Right.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I was looking at you had a bunch of ice on your HQ. I was reading that you were holding a bunch of agendas. So I was running R&D. I was running all over the place to try to get you to spend your money so that when I eventually did run HQ, you couldn't afford to res that ice. But you had that one.
Brain 2.0.
Well, there was one. That might be it. Yeah. So the subroutine means you get to res a piece of ice for free. Right. And so then that's what you were able to block up your HQ a little bit. So my strategy didn't work very well there. Plus also that system gateway deck for Hasbioroid. There's so much money in that deck that I might get you poor, but you're going to be back up to 20, 25 credits, in the next 2-3 turns anyways.
Well, it was tough because to get there, I needed to get to 10. There were some of my turns where I was just using clicks for dollars until I could start taking advantage of those cards. In the meantime, you were running like crazy. So I guess, we're talking about clicks. One of the things we haven't talked about are the action points. Right, that's one of the mechanisms that's on there. So the runner is going to get 4 clicks, and the corp is going to get a card drawn. That's a mandatory step. So essentially a click, and then 3 clicks. So how do you feel about that balance of actions?
Oh yeah, that's originally what made me fall in love with Netrunner after playing Magic the Gathering so much. Basically, all the card games at the time had a rule or a norm that everybody drew a card every turn, and that's how the game progressed. Mm-hmm. And Netrunner came along and it said, you know what? If you don't want to draw cards, don't draw cards. If you want to draw cards, you can draw up to 4.
As the runner.
Yeah, as the runner. Well, or the corp. The corp could draw 4 cards if they wanted to.
But the corp must draw 1.
It really turned that on its head, the paradigm of all players having a limited feed or drip of growing access to the deck that they built. Instead, Netrunner said you could adjust that nozzle, turn the fire hose on, or shut it completely off.
Right.
But I love the fact that the corp has to draw 1 each turn. Doesn't have a choice, because ultimately you're going to run up against a hand limit, and you may be holding on to things.
It has shareholders. They got to make money. So
they got to make money. So I got to be setting up remote servers, or I have to be discarding them to archive. Either way, I am presenting targets to the runner. I think it's such a small thing, but it is perfect in the way it was executed.
Yes, agreed.
I don't know why action points are such a problem, though, in games. Because first you think, all right, I got 3 actions. That's fine. And then you always start making mistakes. You're like, well, wait, was that my first action? Oh, no, I drew a card first, right?
That's why you have counters.
I know. And then you use the counters. But even then you start making mistakes. Like, oh, I forgot to move my counter. I've done 3
Well, you have
actions,
your opponent
right?
track your action use.
Oh, there you go. That's the house rules right there.
Well,
that's a great
idea. That's tournament
actually.
Rules. Your opponent tracks how many actions you've used.
That's really good.
Dave and I kept having senior moments where we're like, wait a minute, what was this one again? And
well, because you think you're just doing 3 things, but a run could take like 10 minutes. And now you finish the run and you're all, wait, I still have 1 more, right?
Very true.
There can be a lot of analysis paralysis, especially as the runner, because you're getting bluffed by the corp. And so sometimes you're like, okay, I want to do this action. And then you're like, oh, wait, I thought of a reason. I absolutely don't want to do this. I take it back.
Right. Yeah. Or I need to run last. Or I need to run first. There's different cards that it benefits you to run early or late in your turn.
Right.
Well, and really, going into any turn, your turn should be mapped. Always draw first. You don't end your turn with drawing cards. If you're
Right.
drawing cards, you draw them first because you need all your information up front. But unless you might run into snags and have to, zig or zag. But for the most part, you really should know your 3 actions or 4 actions or what you're doing before you start executing them. But I'll still get turned around and think, do I have another? Oh, no, I guess I'm done. Okay, sorry.
Yeah. We mentioned that Lucas Litzinger had a big influence in creating the factions and making the adjustments to the original Netrunner game to bring it into the Android universe and making it a richer experience. What about, Richard Garfield here seems to be just the master of dueling games because he starts out with Magic the Gathering, which I don't know if we'll ever do an episode on that one. I'm leaning towards no. But then,
I haven't played in 30 years. I don't know.
Oh, no. I tried to keep my sons from playing it, and they eventually found it, and we went through a phase. So
don't do drugs, don't play Magic. That's parenting.
My grandmother said I was communing with the devil when I used to play.
Okay. Oh. And then, he comes up with Netrunner, which at the time was a CCG when it was originally released. It moves over into the LCG space. It still has deck building. And then he comes up with Keyforge, right? Which you buy a pre-built deck. There's no deck building. You can't modify it. You just play the deck that you're given. Do we want to talk about that legacy? Do we think that that's innovation in action? What do you think the next thing might be?
I absolutely agree. It's innovation. I am deeply respectful for all of these innovations, and in my opinion, their culmination in Android Netrunner. I don't know if we can go any higher from here. It's my personal opinion.
Okay, so you think Android Netrunner is the apex, and Keyforge never happened?
I think Keyforge was an awesome lesson that I respect, but would not play.
Okay.
I've had fun with Keyforge as a kitchen table game, and that's really all the only way I want to experience it.
Right.
I mean, it felt like in the beginning is that you buy your decks and you get to play. You don't have to buy individual cards. You don't have to worry with deck construction. How fun. Just jump in and go. And it still turned into a pay-to-play kind of thing. I'm going to buy 1,000 decks, and there's going to be a A+ deck in there somewhere, an S-tier deck.
Right.
But innovation is definitely the right word, like Paul was saying. That's just, we love Kinesia, right? But he's iterating on himself quite a bit. He comes out with a game and there's 5 iterations.
You know what would make me like Keyforge more is if it gave you more cards than you needed to put into your deck. Like we talked about.
Oh, okay.
Tuning.
Using your bamboo and snot to make the best possible deck you could out of it.
Bubblegum and duct tape, guys.
Yeah, if you had to have a 30-card Keyforge deck, then the random cards should be a set of like 45, and you pick the best 2/3 of them to play. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
So is that the next iteration?
Yeah, I mean, Keyforge was such a leap in a new direction. Do we build on from there? I mean,
I think it could be iterated on. That's true.
Yeah.
But, production costs for it are through the roof, right?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I want to say that Fantasy Flight ran into a problem with all of the unique deck tracking.
Yeah.
And they ended up, I think, selling off the license, right? Somebody else is producing Keyforge now.
Who knows? Maybe with development and artificial intelligence, et cetera, it becomes more and more feasible.
Right.
Well, because of the apps, you're able to track the strength of a deck just based on wins and losses. If the players continually track wins and losses, this deck versus that deck, it's like the BCS playoffs as you start to find out which teams are better than the other teams and which teams are evenly matched. And the system's there, but it involves, user input and, it starts to get a little tricky.
Right. So with that, let's move on to the prompts. Weighting complexity on Board Game Geek's scale of 1 to 5, which also aligns with Board Game Arena's scale. How would you rate the complexity or weight of Android Netrunner? Paul, I'll give you the honors.
Yeah, I've been playing this game for almost 30 years, so I cannot rate its complexity. I have no clue. A 3, I guess.
That's what I had. So
Me too.
Okay, well, come on. That was easy.
Well, I've got some reasoning there, too. I mean, the base game, like we learned with System Gateway, the core, it's fairly simple once you get those down. And then the rest of the rules are written on the cards. So dosed out to you in these, little snippets of how this card works. And it works together so well that you just need to know the base, and then you read the cards. The rules on the cards supersede the rules in the rule book at some points, and you're off and running. So
just like Dominion.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, and I also feel like deck building in general has a point increase in weight. So I might think the original game was a 2, but if deck building is going to be a component of it, you first have to understand the game so then you can build for it. It's that extra bit of oomph that makes it more complex than just picking up and playing, which honestly was one of the things I liked about Keyforge, was that I could just pick it up and play. And then it turned out the game itself was okay. This one's amazing. So I feel like there's more encouraging you to make that investment.
I forgot to look up my new favorite metric, which I just looked it up right now. So if I go to the Netrunner...
Oh gosh, on this game, forget about it.
No. So my favorite metric now is, so there are 12,800 forum posts on Board Game Geek about Netrunner. 2,900 of them are about rules. So that's about a 23% on rules. That's not bad compared to some games that we've seen.
Right.
23% of posts are rules questions. So that, to me, it puts it at a 3.
Yeah, I would estimate. I mean, you tell me, but my feeling is that most popular games on Board Game Geek have over a 50% ratio.
Oh, yeah. I forget what game was it.
Darwin's
because I wasn't
Journey.
on the Carnegie pod. Yeah. There was one that we did recently, and there were more rules questions than anything else. Than everything. It was over 50% rules questions on what is this again? How does this work? And that's accompanying a 50-page rule book. So
yes, indeed.
That justifies the 3 here.
So then strategy. How much opportunity is there for strategy and long-term planning? Same scale, 1 to 5. Dave?
Strategy, I'm going to go with a 5. It's got deck construction. So your strategy begins before the game begins, that you're building your deck to a specific strategy. I mean, talk about path dependency. I've chosen my path before I sat down. So,
right?
I mean, deck construction in general starts at a 4 or 5, but this one, there's a lot of different ways to skin the cat. That feels like a phrase that we shouldn't be saying anymore for some reason.
We should retire that one?
Yeah.
Right.
But anyways, it's a 5 for me.
All right. Paul, what did you have?
This is hard for me to answer, and a lot of it goes back to what you were just talking about with weight and complexity, it being a deck builder. And as Dave said, if I was going to play in a tournament, I think strategy would be at a 4. But if somebody just handed me a deck and I didn't have to think about it, then I would say that strategy is a 3 as the corp and a 2 as the runner.
Interesting. Why is it easier for the runner?
It's not easier, it's more tactical. The corp has to really plan ahead and get things done in a window of time, whereas the runner is just cruising along with what they're drawing, and eventually they're going to have this massive rig that can break into anything the corp has.
Got it. Okay. I also had it down as a 4. Much the reasons that, Dave, you say it's a 5. So the last time I did something like this, you said 4, but what I heard was 5. But it's once you start deck building in earnest, you're doing a lot of your planning before you even sit down. And then it's just a question of, are you going to get the hand draw, or have you mitigated card draw to execute on that plan? For me, it's still a 4 because there's a component of luck that sneaks in. So how much do you think luck plays a factor? Same scale, 1 to 5.
It depends on which side you're playing. I think the corp luck is a 2 because bluffing is so important. Whereas for the runner, luck is more of a 3 because even if you do your best with deck building and everything else, your deck could still decide to hide all your key cards at the bottom.
Right.
Or you could just be having a bad day, make bad choices, but get lucky and turn over an agenda.
Right.
When you run the R&D or the HQ.
Right. You can tell that your corp has nothing but agendas in the HQ hand.
Or even if it's like 1 in 5, let's say the corp's playing a perfect game. You're like, I got 20% chance to take an agenda if I run HQ. I'm going to do it anyway. Oh, look, I got it.
Right.
Lucky me.
Okay.
Well, when you say the importance of bluffing, is this on the level of poker? There's a certain level of poker where the cards you draw are almost meaningless.
As the corp, I really believe it is.
All right.
Yeah. Again, that's my weakest part of the game. But
I'm terrible at it.
So I have luck as 2. I mean, it can't be 1 because it's a card game. And there is the phrase, the luck of the draw. And this is exactly where it comes from.
Right.
But I have it as a 2 because of the deck construction is you should build your decks for consistency and repeatability. That's the idea. I mean, it does happen where I just drew all my agendas or I can't find my money cards. Maybe that's because I didn't build my deck well, but usually, you don't put one of every good card when you're building a deck. You can put up to 3 of each card. And so you have 3 of all your good cards. So you're increasing that kind of homogeneity of your plays that you should experience the repeatability, like I said. So, but again, like Paul said, the guy, somebody runs your HQ, they got a 20% of pulling your agenda and they pull it. So that is luck. I mean, I guess that's statistics. We can get into that argument, but it's a 2. I think, at the end of the day, skill wins.
I agree. I also had it down as a 2. And for all those reasons, I do want to ask Paul a question about deck construction. So, you've been a competitive player. When you construct your decks and you say, okay, I've got so many percentage, how do you model that? How do you know that's the right percentage? Was there a quick way of going through, or was it just playing game after game after game after game? And did you keep notes?
The game gives you guidelines.
The actual answer is use a spreadsheet.
Ooh, that got Todd's attention.
Yeah, right. Okay, I can do that.
Because what you want to do in Magic and Netrunner is, 1, make sure you draw enough of the thing you need the most, land or ice, and 2, make sure you have a curve that you want your deck to achieve, either quick creatures or big creatures, or for ice you can use early in the game versus ice you can surprise the runner with at the end of the game. And so it really is a statistical puzzle that I enjoy solving.
Okay, I create a spreadsheet and I carefully enter my deck's composition and I come up with percentages that say I have 25% ice cards and however many percent of economy cards, and then I have so many agendas. What then? How does that turn into actionable intelligence for deck building? If someone's listening to this pod and they go, great, I want to get into System Gateway, and when they want to start looking at building their decks, what goes beyond just percentages of types of cards? How does the spreadsheet help you going beyond that?
I'm sorry, Todd, could you ask it a different way?
How do I discover the curve?
Well, if I can jump in here, then because I think Paul can correct me on a few things. So, because I think he's got a lot more experience with this. So I think as a general guideline for deck building is that I'm looking at the minimum. The card's your identity is going to tell you the minimum. Like you got to have at least 40 cards in this deck.
Right.
That's going to give you an agenda number that you have to have, that this 40 card deck needs to have, 18 or 17 agenda points in the deck.
Right.
And then I'm building to that 17 by, I'm not going to put a whole bunch of 2-score agendas because that gets me to either 16 or 18. So I need some odd number agendas as well. So I'm thinking about it on those lines is how am I going to get to 7 points? Because that's what you're trying to get to, 7 points to win the game.
Maybe this will answer your question, Todd. There are great websites now to help with deck building. And for Netrunner, there is netrunnerdb.com.
Mm-hmm.
You can build a deck, and then you can go to the information tab of that deck. It will break down all the different nuances of card costs, card types, and it also has a Monte Carlo card draw simulator where you can say, okay, what is a likely 5-card hand I'm going to draw at the beginning of the game? Or what is possibly my first 10 cards going to be?
Right.
And you can see the percentages of those as well. Because especially in Netrunner, as the corp, you want to make sure you get some cheap ice early. And as the runner, you want to make sure you, in my opinion, get to your deck search cards early.
Right. Okay. So what I heard it was now there are websites that can do in an automated process, give me some ideas. So I was trying to figure out if there was something in the composition of the spreadsheet that did that for you. Like when you were doing your deck modeling before there were sites like Netrunner DB, how did you figure out sample hands, likelihoods, things like that? I mean, raw statistics I get, but it feels like there needs to be an element of I'm running draws and I'm examining what happens.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I would do that back in the day.
And then I got to take notes and then I got to go back and tweak and tune.
Right. And it was also real life testing. That was a huge part of it as well. I mean,
Right.
back when I was really into the game, I would play at least once a week and usually several nights a week testing my decks. And now you can do that for Netrunner on a website called gentechie.net.
Okay.
And sometimes that's part of the fun, as I'm building this experimental deck that's going to try to mill your draw pile or something like that. Let's see if this works. And then, you play it and you're like, well, it didn't quite work as I'd hoped. I need to kind of take out some of this, put in some of that. So that's just part of the game outside of the game.
Right.
Tuning up your engine.
Okay. So now theme. How much do you think the theme has been integrated with this game? Dave?
I think we hit this pretty hard already. It's a 5 for me.
It's a 5 for you.
Yeah, for sure. The art is great. The cards look, my backsplash on my phone is a Netrunner card. I love the art. I love the theme. It's like everything invokes everything that's going on. So I love it. And the stories that you can tell. That's always a key indicator of things. We can finish the game and you can tell a narrative of what happened.
Okay. Yeah, they even designed one expansion called Terminal Directive that was more storytelling focused. So, I originally had this as a 4, but with that, you convinced me. This is a 5. I'll give up on the fact that it may not have all of the cyberpunk I want in it, but...
Well, you remember the time that my runner negotiated with your Hasbioroid, got into your HQ. You remember that narrative. And as you famously say, you don't remember that time you planted that bean, but you remember that time that I spent some time, had a cup of coffee with your Hasbioroid and walked right past your ice.
Yep. 100%. It's harvesting a carrot in Agricola, by the way.
Mm-hmm. I always go to Bonanza. I don't know why.
I also agree that it's a 5, primarily because of everything Fantasy Flight Games did with the game. I mean, I've read some interviews where they talk about how Fantasy Flight created a story team for the game to write stories that then the Netrunner team would incorporate into cards, which would then influence the story team to write more stories. And it was just this recursion loop of creating content. So now there's all sorts of novels and other Android stuff that Fantasy Flight has.
It was like a perfect storm of game mechanics and then their own internal IP in the Android universe.
For sure.
That allowed it to just, emerge as this.
Yeah, especially because, like I talked about, Garfield-based Netrunner on Cyberpunk 2020.
Right.
Which was based on Blade Runner, and the Android board game that originated Final Fantasy Flight's Android IP was based on the movie Blade Runner. So they both originated from the same influence.
Mm-hmm.
Have either of you actually played Android, the board game? I never have.
Yes.
Okay.
I played it at BGG Con many years ago.
I assume if it was very good, you would have had us play it. So I
really enjoyed it, but it is story-driven, highly thematic, and not really a game, more of an experience.
Okay.
We can play it if you want. Actual playing time. So let's just run quickly through this. The game says it's 45 minutes. Do you agree or disagree with that?
When I think of a game of Netrunner, I think of playing as the corp and then playing as the runner back to back.
Good point.
And to me, that takes about an hour. It's about 30 minutes for each play.
Yeah. Okay.
That's a good point. You rarely just sit down to play one, it's like, cribbage or something like that. You're playing multiple hands, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd agree with that. And is a little thin, but I think I'm often picking the game up after a long time off, or I'm teaching somebody the game. So each individual game is coming in at 45 to 60 minutes for me. But that's my irregularity of play.
But you keep wanting to come back to this game. I think that's one of the other reasons this was a difficult episode to prepare for. Was like, I have so much pent up emotion about this game. And working through it all is going to take some time here. So which edition is being the best? I mean, we've talked about the 3 main ones, right? So there was a 2012 original release in the Android universe. There was a 2017 revised edition, and now we have System Gateway. Do you have any particular thoughts about one being better than the other, or just be glad you have access to any of them?
I don't have enough experience with the null signal version.
Mm-hmm.
The revised Android Netrunner that Fantasy Flight made was a step improvement over the original game. They implemented a lot of lessons learned,
right?
Particularly in card balance. So I assume that null signal has carried on from there.
From what I've played, it really seems like it And it's almost a moot point in that, I mean, you're not going to play Netrunner CCG in 2024, 25. Like, it's just, you're not going to get your hands on the card. You're not going to play it. If you want to pick
play it if you want.
Oh,
but no, Android Netrunner is a much better game.
Well, but then the Fantasy Flight Games Android Netrunner, and I still, because I subscribe to the channel on BGG, so every once in a while somebody will make a post say, I'm looking to pick up an entire set. And the last I saw a few years ago, an entire set's like $1,400 because it's out of print.
Oh, so really? Okay.
Yeah. I know somebody who has a full set. Yeah. So my experience with null signal games, it's good enough to where I don't need to start ordering a data pack from Australia, digging deep to find all of this stuff. Like, I'd pick up System Gateway, actually they have a new gateway system or what, I don't know what they're calling it, coming out in spring of 2025 that's going to replace System Gateway and maybe System Upgrade. I'm not really sure, but they have an onboarding path and then they've got cycles coming out. And I don't see any reason why you wouldn't just jump in there if you're looking to get into the game in 2024.
Nice. All right. Expansions. There are too many for us to go through and talk about them all. Do you have a particular expansion or a cycle, let's say, that stands out to you as particularly memorable, either for a card it had or a story that it created?
I do not. I don't have familiarity enough with the cycles to differentiate that much, as I've only played on just a very casual level.
Right. Paul?
No, nothing to add. We already talked about favorite cards, so.
Yeah, okay. I will say that I liked the lunar cycle quite a bit. I liked the idea of taking this to the moon and some of the changes they had in there. It was felt like it was a brutal cycle as far as the corpse getting some good hitters in there. So I'll call that out as a cycle that was of interest.
I think for those of us that were playing in 2012, so 2012 was my introduction to it. Probably
it was released.
Yeah, so probably when Paul found out it was coming out and came to game night and said, we're all getting Netrunner, let's do this. And I remember Drew got some, Greg got some, and so we would just play with each other on Monday night, sneak in a few games before we'd get to our multiplayer board games. And that was actually my first experience with, you really need a second core set. And I wasn't in a place in my life to where I was able to accept that. That I wanted to be a completist and a second core set. They're ripping me off now, but now
right.
I've come to terms with things like that.
I mean, you sang that same tune for Arkham Horror.
Right. Arkham Horror, I was able to justify it by saying they allowed you to buy half a core set. If you want the full core set, you buy two.
Right. They allowed you to buy half the game as a trial.
But I think all of us at the time, we played a ton of it. We were building our decks in between Thursday nights or whatever night we were meeting. And then we'd show up on Thursday night and play against each other. And we probably made it 2 cycles in before we kind of started to fizzle. Honestly, we were probably getting into 18xx at the time. And 2-player games are just very tough for us to play because 4 or 5 good friends are together. We're going to play a 4 or 5 player game where pairing off is fun.
Together. Yep.
Yeah, so that's just the nature of our game groups, is we haven't really been able to just keep this in strong rotation. But so I think most of us made it through the second cycle, whatever that was, and then kind of started to peter off.
Yeah. Okay. So most recognizable comparison. I anticipate we may be butting heads on some of these because for me, this was a really difficult game to find comparisons to. What did you have as the highest ranking game that reminded you the most of Android Netrunner? Paul?
Well, for me, it is Star Wars Rebellion.
Yep.
One player attempts to achieve hidden objectives while the other probes remote locations. Although the roles are the opposite of what you'd expect with Star Wars Rebellion, because the prober is the Empire, and the ones setting out to achieve hidden objectives are the rebels. So it's the opposite of Android Netrunner.
Mm-hmm. And also opposite in that it has a massive table presence.
And minis and other things, but yes.
All right. Dave, what did you have?
My most recognizable comparison is Legend of the Five Rings LCG.
Okay.
And other than the asymmetry, so it's asymmetrical in that you're constructing decks, there's different factions. So, and the different factions play differently. It doesn't have that asymmetry where you're kind of each playing a completely different kind of game, but you're running on each other's columns. Basically, it has very similar feels in that way. I got the Legend of the Rings core. I bought half of a core box. That's when I started justifying this. I'm like, what a great entry point for $25, or maybe paid $20. I bought half a core box. I played with it. And I really liked the game, but it's much longer than Netrunner. And I just didn't really see it getting a ton of play. So I kind of stopped there. But this is where I said prepping for this podcast cost me $23. So last night I bought 17 expansion packs for Legend of the Five Rings, and it cost me $23, including shipping. They're 99 cents a piece at Miniature Market. I'm like, I may never play them, but this is one of the most beautiful games I've owned. The cards are stunning. And I thought for $17 plus $6 shipping, I'm buying it. I mean,
but that's on super clearance, right? Because it's a dead game.
It's a dead game. In fact, one of those 99-cent ones is a $40 premium box expansion. I paid 99 cents for it. And I was trying to justify it, saying I'm not going to play it. I know I'm not going to play it. But I thought, I just spent $57 for McDonald's for my family earlier in the night. I'm going to pay $23, and I don't care if I sit on the shelf. So it'll be here later in the week.
There it is. Well, for my most recognizable comparison, I wanted to lean into player asymmetry. And the first time that I was amazed by players that were playing different games and somehow were all competing directly was in Chaos in the Old World, where everybody is playing a god with a different horrible agenda with powers to match. And it was shocking. It was gruesome. It was awesome. And that was my first real experience that I remember of having people doing completely different things in a board game, and I loved it. So less recognizable comparison. What did you have for something that was hopefully not so far out, no one's ever heard of it, but it was hard for me to find one. What did you guys have? Dave?
I feel like I got a good comp here. So
let's hear it.
I'm going with the 2000 Richard Borg Hera and Zeus.
Okay.
That is a Cosmos 2-player game.
Yeah, it is.
And you are taking your Greek warriors against each other. You're installing them in, and it's that cat and mouse on it's Stratego is the,
right.
What do they call that? The secret unit deployment. So, you're installing certain units in certain places, and the other player is trying to find those units and going head to head kind of down columns. And that's a game that my oldest daughter, when she was young, we played a ton of Hera and Zeus and had a good time with that.
I like that. Good call. Paul, how about you?
Yeah, for me, it is the game Yomi. This is a card game version of Street Fighter, I guess you would call it.
Okay.
And it is all about bluffing. It comes with pre-built decks, which each are associated with a character that has strengths and weaknesses.
Okay.
So while you're playing, your bluffing decisions are based on the strengths and weaknesses of you and your opponent, and it really just ramps up the whole wine in front of me gymnastics that we can get into.
That is awesome. I've never played that game. Okay.
Hey, well, just while we're talking, I got a shipment notification on my Legend of the Five Rings. It's on the way. I'm never going to play it. I literally bought the core box, and I think they announced it was dead 2 weeks later. So.
Oh, wow. So did you get the second half?
No, I didn't, because that's still full price if you can find it somewhere. I'm only buying 99-cent stuff.
All right. So for less recognizable comparison, I mentioned that cyberpunk is a sentimental favorite theme for me. And ultimately, the one RPG that I just went head over heels for was Shadowrun, which was some weird combination of cyberpunk and fantasy, because the idea is that magic has come back to the future world. So you have wizards, you have dragons, but you have street samurai, you have runners. And there is a cooperative deck building game called Shadowrun Crossfire, where you and up to 2 other people are runners that are trying to complete missions in that world. And so that was my choice. But really, when it comes to cyberpunk, there really aren't a lot of well-known games with this theme, at least in the board gaming universe.
Surprisingly.
They are all over on the RPG side.
Yeah.
So house rules, how would you improve this game? And Paul already told us I had nothing, so I want to use Paul's rule. But I guess that was a tournament rule, Paul?
Oh, you mean to play as both the runner and the corp?
Well, that's a good one, but no, the one where your opponent tracks your clicks.
Oh, yes, that's a tournament rule.
Okay.
I will definitely be doing that from now on. And it's not really a rule, but I play casual. To me, this is a kitchen table game. And I know Null Signal games, they do have tournaments. They're really supporting that part of it. But I don't follow any ban lists. I'm playing with the cards we got and having fun with it.
Right. Yeah, I had also jotted down Netrunner DB as a great resource for that part of it if you want to be casual about it.
Well, my house rule would be to go ultra casual and do a draft.
Yeah.
There's something popularized called a cyber war draft for Android Netrunner, and you basically take a bunch of random cards, sort them into separate piles, and then everybody drafts cards, and you have to draft an identity to play as. But after that, the draft rule is that you get to ignore influence limits, so you can use every card you've drafted when you're deck building.
That's a little chaotic. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you're all the factions as you play either the runner or the corp, but
wow,
it makes it super casual.
Okay, I like it. So now if this game is being played at game night, what do you want to play afterwards? What's the best double feature game that goes along with Android Netrunner? And I almost feel like I should just hand it off to Paul first because I know what I want him to say.
Yeah, it's unquestionably more Netrunner.
There it is.
Right.
Again and again and again. Have a mini tournament if you've got more than 2 people at game night.
Right? Okay, so that's interesting because that was a limitation for me when I was thinking about this. It's like, well, it's a 2-player game, so if I'm going to think of something to play afterwards, then it also needs to be a 2-player game. So I went with Legendary Encounters: The Matrix. So if you've never played a Legendary Encounters game before, it is deck building, but they are simulating plot lines in movies by having programmed events come out, program sequences or campaigns. And in this case, you can take on the role of like Neo, Trinity, or Morpheus, one of the other heroes, and go fight against Agent Smith and try to bring down the Matrix. What do you have, Dave?
I say let's play some Marvel Champions. I mean, I'm following what you're saying. There's only 2 of us.
Right.
And Marvel Champions, I think, plays best at 2. But you're already in that mode. But now instead of me getting upset about the good cards and combos you're playing, we're now play cooperatively so I can get excited about the deck that you have and the good combos you're playing. So it's kind of in the same mode, but now let's work together for a little bit.
Okay. I like that a lot.
What did we play the other night? How did we double header it?
We didn't.
I already forgot.
We triple headered Android Netrunner, and we just played it 3 times and called it a night.
That was it? Oh, you're right. Okay. We're getting too old until we call it early. It's 10 o'clock. We got to go to bed. In our younger days, we would have whipped out,
Yeah. Another 6 games, been up till 2 a.m. and then just paid for it. Yeah. True. So what feature of the game still stands out to you? What has aged the best about Android Netrunner? Dave?
The asymmetry play. I mean, we've talked it to death already, but to me, that's what really stands out above similar sorts of games. And then what that turned into as far as what Paul's been talking about on what FFG did with the theme, on how that just even leaned more into that asymmetry.
Yeah, 100% agree. If I added anything, it would be the fact that they turned it into an LCG, but we've already said that it wasn't the first instance of that. Paul, what did you have?
For me, it's the factions and the deck building rules, since I already have the original Netrunner game.
Yeah, it has its place of honor in your curio cabinet.
Yes.
What feature of the game now disappoints? What may not have aged as well? Do you have any items there, Paul?
The fact that it was canceled by Hasbro.
Yeah, well, ironically, that's what I had too, is that it went out of print. And the only reason why it's been saved is because of a fan project. I honestly expected this game to come back with a Cyberpunk 2077 theme when that video game was released.
For sure.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is Hasbro owns the term Netrunner. So anything that they made would not be able to use that word.
Okay.
Well, I thought Hasbro was I thought that's why they didn't renew the license. I fully expected a Netrunner CCG to show up a few years later, and it's still a mystery as to why they didn't renew the contract.
Yeah.
The game was thriving, from what I understand at the time.
Absolutely.
So I don't know what they were doing. It seemed like they were going to do something, and then it's been 6 years, 7 years,
and the something was going to be Cyberpunk 2077 because there was so much buzz about that game before it was released.
Yeah,
true.
Alas,
sigh.
Well, I said what hasn't aged the best for me, it's the lifestyle element of the game. It's not a casual. I mean, I say I play casual, but you got to play it a ton to get into it. There are so many permutations. When you've got 3 running factions, you've got 5 corps. Mm-hmm. That's 15 combinations just in running them against you. I mean, for the completist in me, it's really tough to play the full game And what a lot of players will do is just, I run Jinteki, this is my
Right.
corp. But then there's all this other game out there that I want to play, but who's got the time for that, It's just, there's so much game here, which is a ridiculous complaint about the game. There's too much game here.
Right.
There's too much value for your money.
That sounds like a good problem to have.
Yeah, but it isn't. It drives me crazy.
I mean, the problem is personal time, right?
Yes.
That is the problem.
I mean, Keyforge went to solve it. My son and I, we over the years have probably played more Keyforge than Netrunner because it's grab and play. You just grab a deck off the shelf. I've still got some decks in Shrink just sitting on the shelf that we haven't even got to yet. I mean, just grab and play. Let's go. So that's the problem that I think they solved with Keyforge, is that overhead was much, much lower.
Right. That's exactly the problem they were trying to solve. And I thought they did a decent job of it until you started getting the stories coming up of like there were just some super powered decks out there. And I know there were the chains that were supposed to help balance it and all that, but that was not for the kitchen table player. Like if you lucked into a great deck, fine, you played it, then you hand it to me, I'll play it. That part was great.
I think you taught me Keyforge, Todd, and I think one of the things you told me is you think this is an overpowered card, but my next card is even more powerful than that card. Every card is overpowered.
Right, exactly. So did Android Netrunner replace a previous game for you?
I think we all have the same answer here.
I think we do. Paul, what is it?
For me, it was all other CCGs and LCGs.
Oh, I was more specific, but yeah, that's my answer. Well, no, the cooperative LCGs is a kind of a different space. I mean, those are the only two that survived Fantasy Flight Games. I mean, Arkham Horror, Marvel Champions.
Both cooperative.
This is not eating their lunch.
Right.
So, Dave, the answer is?
Specifically Magic the Gathering. I mean, I literally have not opened my box of Magic cards. And they're trying with these commander decks and Magic. I mean, they've tried so hard to come back to the fold. And it's just, I'm not playing it.
Yeah. Like I said, my sons, despite my best efforts, got into it. And so I broke out some of my old cards. They were surprised by, some of them, they were just like, wow, I can't believe that card even exists. I'm like, yeah, there we go. Totally banned in all formats, but I've got a copy. So we don't play Magic anymore. A funny story on that one. One of their friends spent like $250 to build a deck that was thought to be unstoppable. I mean, and all it did was it ended up giving him 5 million life. It felt like it just kept giving him more and more life and you couldn't wear him down. And then my son came up with a poison deck that basically didn't matter because you get to 10 poison counters. It doesn't matter how much life you have. The game's over, you lose. So his friends stopped playing. And then my younger son generated a deck. And again, we're talking like for fractions of money, right? They're spending $10, $15 to get the cards. He built a mill deck that all it did was force you to discard cards. And so it killed the poison deck and it killed Magic the Gathering in our house because it sucked all the fun out of the room.
Well, that's the nature of CCGs and even LCGs is a meta will emerge. And now the next cards are going to defeat that meta. And that's the life cycle.
Yep. So yeah, Android Netrunner totally replaced Magic the Gathering for us. So has it since been replaced? And if so, by what?
Not for me, but other asymmetric games scratch the same itch, such as Star Wars Rebellion.
Okay. Yeah, I like that.
For me, it's the cooperative LCGs. I play Arkham Horror, Marvel Champions, Lord of the Rings more than I play Android Netrunner, because that one I have it set up to play 2-player, but if I'm by myself, I'll just play it two-handed. Right. I don't need anyone else, so it gets more table time. Yeah.
And I had the one objection that we've already discussed, which is like the lifestyle component of it. For me, I just don't want to invest all of the time I feel like I would need to. And I would prefer to play a cooperative game. I don't want to invest the time to be competitive. So I prefer to play the cooperative game. So I had Arkham Horror, the card game, as the one that I do play that has replaced Android Netrunner.
The one thing I do really like about Arkham Horror game, other than the fact that Fantasy Flight is done amazing with it, is that you can play it single player.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Soundtrack. What music would you want to listen to while playing? And I'm going to jump in and take the prize on this one because I think it was back in the Race for the Galaxy episode, perhaps, I had mentioned that the Blade Runner soundtrack was earmarked for a future episode, and this is that episode.
Awesome.
For sure. For sure.
Did you guys have others?
I also said the Blade Runner soundtrack. I at least start there and then just let the algorithm recommend more.
Let AI determine
true cyberpunk
how appropriate. Yeah.
There's a lot of that synth pop, basically, the soundtrack of a lot of 80s movies. Even Stranger Things kind of redid it. I'll take any of those.
Nice. Good call with Stranger Things. I like that. All right, so rating on Board Game Geek scale of 1 to 10 now. How would you rate Android Netrunner? And I feel like I'm going to let Dave go first. I know what Paul's rating is going to be.
It's a solid 10.
Okay.
No caveats, no like familiarity boost or family boost or anything. I mean, it's a straight 10. Despite being canceled twice, despite, all of these hurdles, it's one of the best games I've ever played.
Yeah. Okay. I'll jump in and say that for me, it's a 9. Like, I want to like this game. Heck, I want to love this game. I like playing other games. And I feel like this game would only be a 10 if I stopped playing a lot of other things and just totally got absorbed into this world. Because what ends up happening is I don't have the great experiences. I have good experiences with it because we play sporadically. So for me, it's a time investment. It could be a 10, but it's not there.
If there were a 3 or 4 player version of it, then maybe, because then we'd play it more.
Right.
But that's obviously a completely different game.
So we need an Overlord version of Android Netrunner.
Or Callisto, right? I'm looking forward to Undaunted Callisto, because that took Undaunted, a very good 2-player game, and now, which is really a glorified, teams of 2. I mean, right. So it's a 4-player game technically. So if there were some sort of teams of 2 Netrunner, just so we've got more than 2 very often. In fact, we played the other week only because everybody happened to cancel out on game night, and we're like, great. Let's do some Netrunner for the first time in years. Yeah,
exactly. And Paul, rating?
It's a 10. I mean, I've been playing this game for almost 30 years, so there you go.
So earlier in the episode, you had said that it's your favorite game. Is it literally number 1 all time on your list?
Yes, it is now. Yeah, I mean, it
is now.
Sometimes I like Go more, but
okay,
Netrunner is amazing.
Awesome.
Side note, though, Paul, do your kids play Go with you? Does your wife play Go with you?
My younger son likes to play Go.
Okay. I don't have a Go set. I've only, I haven't really gotten deep into it because I feel like I haven't had a good Go partner.
Yeah, well, in this day and age with all these thematic games, it's hard to really get into abstracts.
Right. But it's so much more of a game, though, right? It's meditative. It's enlightening. I don't know. It's still out there for me. By the end of my life, I'm hoping to have had a deep Go experience. I might be running out of
because
time, but
it's a placement game. It's about creating something compared to chess and the like, which are movement games. They're very different feel.
Awesome. All right. So last question, is Android Netrunner replayable, and how soon would you want to revisit the game? Paul?
It is absolutely replayable, but as both of you have already mentioned, it is a lifestyle game. And so you either play it all the time or once in a blue moon.
Right.
Yeah. Although it's hot in rotation for me right now. So Paul and our kids are just getting old enough to be able to play.
True. Very
I know,
true.
Todd, your kids, you kind of had a failure to launch with this game years ago, and now they've both blown the coop.
Right.
But I'm hoping I'm on the verge of a big Netrunner run. I played with my son a few times. He definitely likes it. But, they're so busy with school and sports. Come on, what's this world come to?
Right. And I also had it down as being replayable. And I could play this game every week. I just wouldn't want to give up Monday night gaming for it. So we have to carve out some other time to get it played. All right. And with that, the last agenda has been stolen. For our January 1st episode, we'll be talking about a party game that we've enjoyed as a group together. Hey guys, thanks for being available. We did this on a morning, got an earlier start than usual, but my goodness, the time just flew by.
Thank you very much. I'm signing out.
All right. I'm jacking out.
Goodbye. Thank you for listening to Replayable. Support for our podcast comes from listeners like you. Please subscribe, hit that like button, and leave a review wherever you listen to us. Thank you for your support. Come and talk about board games with us at replayable.fm or on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook as ReplayableFM. You can also join our team at patreon.com/replayable. We welcome your feedback, which is the only way that we are going to get better. You can get in touch with us via email at feedback@replayable.fm. And if you're interested in sponsoring us, then please contact us at sponsors@replayable.fm.